we're going to talk about this is kind of an after action report, kind of a debrief of what we did back in into September of Red Skies. Red Sky was a simulated emergency test, as it says here, and talk a little bit of thanks to Oliver, a little bit of the planning that went on here. This was conducted on the 30th of September of this year. It was a multi-county exercise, and a fairly large one in all respect. Our primary focus of the exercise was to use WinLink, and using WinLink to send forms and to be able to map the results. As far as I can tell, still we had 12 counties involved, and as I'm, this is possibly, I mentioned this in an email to you today, Oliver. I'm not sure. This may be one of the largest, if not the largest, multi-county exercise we've ever done in California, with 12 counties. It was a big exercise, a lot of participants. So possibly the largest. If somebody can refute that, I'd love to hear it. But it was a pretty big deal. So the objectives were, with this scenario, okay, the scenario and the objective, I should say the objectives, the scenario and the objectives. I want to talk about the scenario. Scenario is we have a series of large earthquakes, severe earthquakes here in California. Probably not a realistic situation because earthquakes tend to be somewhat localized, but we're pretending that we had them all up and down California, all through the San Andreas Fault, all 700 miles of it. Anyway, this earthquakes occurred between 0700 and 0800 in the morning. And following the earthquakes, we have a deteriorating situation with downed power lines, which are creating wildfires, extensive wildfires. Now, you know, California has been experiencing a lot of wildfires in the last few years. So this is playing on that situation that we've got. And that was the idea of Red Skies, as Oliver put it, to reflect the fact that it's a fire type disaster combined with the earthquakes. So the groups, amateur groups involved, various groups, ARES and what have you, their job is to provide situational awareness. So situational awareness, ground truth, boots on the ground truth from their locations as to what's going on in this scenario. So the objectives were, again, I mentioned WinLink. So it's handling messages and forms via WinLink. This is for the local groups. This is their objectives of those 12 counties. On a regional level, the local groups collect up their data in the form of the CSV files from WinLink and aggregate that situational awareness and send it to a regional collection point. So that's where the regional part comes in. We're collecting all the data at a centralized point. So the idea is there are local coordinators in each of those 12 counties that forward the aggregate data to the regional coordinator, yours truly. So we started out in preparations for this. Oliver organized a series of meetings, and we put together representatives from the multiple counties, put them together in a planning group. And the goal of that group was to produce an IAP that we could share between the individual counties at a regional level. So this defines the regional coordination. It's talking about things like tactical names representing the counties, regional coordinating frequencies, and defining the nets, defining which forms are to be used in the exercise, and technically how they're to be filled out. More on that later. And of course, plan out a timeline for the exercise. That's another part of creating this IAP. So the local groups are advised to form their own IAPs according to the local policies and procedures, but those local IAPs really need to reflect what's going on at a regional level as well. So this is and I'll talk more about that later on because this became an issue. The local IAPs are fine and local policies and procedures are fine. We're not going to tell somebody how to run their drill, but when it comes to sharing data on a regional level, yeah, people need to be aware of at the regional level. Just seeing a comment up there about Placer County. Oliver, you should make note of that for next year. Love to have Placer County involved. Yeah, the more the merrier. This has been a really incredible event. So moving on from that, some of the decisions that were made our nets are spanning a large geographic area. Believe it or not, on the south side, San Diego, we got San Luis Obispo and possibly more to the north. Uh, uh, Possibly Sacramento and Yolo counties, which are getting way up into Northern California. On the map, it spans about a 500-mile area. So 500 miles north to south. Based on our experience from our 2022 shakeout, which Oliver mentioned earlier, we have a lot of experience in doing this regional comms situation with both WinLink and with HF phone nets, being able to coordinate what's going on. And so we planned on, the plan was to be able to use that experience to move forward with this exercise. So we set up two HF regional nets on 75 and 40 meters. And those were followed by two additional standby frequencies in case conditions change with 30 and 20 meters. And we also kept 60 meters as in abeyance if we needed to use 60 meters as well, which is another good frequency for tactical communications over a regional area. So the regional WinLink station, which is located here, our plan was to use 20 meters for all of our communications on HF. That way we stay away from the local HF RMS gateways in Southern and Northern California. We keep our traffic off of that at the regional levels. We're going to be moving a lot more traffic than the local guys are. So they're moving traffic out on HF, and I was hoping that they would, which I think they did, use the local gateways in their areas, and then I used the more distance gateways, which I was able to do without any difficulty, which was very nice. It was a really good thing there. So, as I mentioned, yeah, W6DQ, the station here is the regional coordination point. So let me talk a little bit about that. What we put together here, this station, by the way, this is my wife and I, KF6QNG, and myself, W6DQ. This is our station here. And we put up two, like I mentioned, two nets. The first one, HF number one, was on 75 meters. We coordinated frequency for that in the IAP, so everybody knew where we were. And that station consisted of the stuff that's in front of me here, a Flex 6700 with an Alpha 87 amp auto tuner. We got a 540-foot horizontal loop out here at 50 feet elevation. So a very good antenna for doing this kind of regional communications. So this works out very well. HF number two, the second net, was on 40 meters. And for that, we used one of my old radios, an old Mark V with a Quadra VL1000. And in this case, we had a single 40-meter dipole at 50 feet elevation. The WinLink HF station consisted of a single IC7300, and I used a Comet CH250A. Is that right? 250 or 350A? I can't remember. Whatever, the Comet HF all-band vertical, along with the Vara HF software. And that works out very well for me here, generally. Using the local gateways here on HF, this thing is phenomenal. It works so well here. There's some really great gateways here in Southern California. Working on 20 meters, it was a little tougher, but it worked. So that was the thing I was happy about. In addition to all the HF stations, of course, we had a local exercise going on here with our Aries group here in Indian Wells Valley, Eastern Kern County. So we had two more local 2-meter nets running here at the station. So we had 5 stations on the air here at W6DQ, QF6, QNG. So that was a pretty busy place for a Saturday. So here's the timeline of the exercise. I mentioned the earthquakes occur between 0700 and 0800. Those major earthquakes strike wide areas of California. So we anticipate that participants would arrive, if they're going to be in a deployed situation, a real situation, they're going to deploy out and be ready to go at around 8 o'clock. If they're simulating from home, they'll be ready to go at the same time. So that's going to be their setup and arrival time, 0800 to 8:15. They should be ready to go. At 8:15, the exercise officially begins, and the first task is for everyone to send out a WinLink check-in to their local coordinator, as well as a USGS Did You Feel It form, again, to the local coordinator. And we also copied that to Ventura County, who, like on behalf of the exercises here, they always map this stuff out for us, and it's just a wonderful group up there that take care of that. And in the case of this exercise, for whoever was interested, Oliver had included, it's not here on the timeline, but included another additional tactical call called Shakeout. And Shakeout was local to his area down there, the Northeast District of LA section. But many people, I think, participated with Shakeout, sending the message down. Now, wait a minute. I'm getting confused. I think
No, you're right. No,
yeah, you
you're
did.
right. We used Shakeout for
You
both,
use
so that
Shakeout,
was
even though
Shakeout.
it's not Shakeout. Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking about that. Wait a minute, that's another exercise. But yeah, you did use Shakeout for Northeast District. Thank you. I was going. Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. But okay, good. So from there, at 0900 to 1000 hours, 9 to 10, we want people to send in field situation reports, FSRs. Again, these are being sent to the local coordination points, and then they're being aggregated and sent to the regional coordinator. From 10 to 11, ICS 213s are to be sent in, and these also might include some local or regional queries, some questions, that we want an answer on a 213 to come back, kind of thing. And then at between 11 and 12, we do a checkout, followed by basically the end of the exercise at 1200. But we also, throughout the exercise, our exercise director, I'll call him that, Oliver's our exercise director, he threw in random injects, which was a lot of fun. And people didn't know what to do with that. But we had a lot of fun with it. It was good. I don't think they were expecting that was part of the problem. I think your guys were expecting it, but I don't think anybody else anywhere in the state was expecting it, Oliver.
Actually, Dennis, they weren't. They didn't know. My crowd was ready to lynch me at our
Oh,
after action report. It was actually pretty funny. They did really well, but it was a lot of. But they thought that exercise outline, as you just said, that was it. Once the
that's it.
bullets hit them, they realized it wasn't working.
They should pay attention because that's what you do in all your exercises. You always have exercise injects, and that
Yep.
really makes it real. That's part of making it real and making it a little bit more dealing with a situation that you might not be ready for. So that's the deal. So great. That was great. There were 9 bulletins that were the inject messages sent out by Oliver through the course of the exercise, 4 hours. All right. So some of the traffic, I want to talk about the results of what we handled here at the regional level. The 75-meter net, HF1, had 14 check-ins. And the check-ins came from the Los Angeles High Desert District, San Joaquin Valley, San Luis Obispo, and San Diego, those areas, those counties. Well, San Joaquin Valley is not a county. We just had a single local coordinator in San Joaquin Valley covering the counties that are part of the San Joaquin Valley section. So that was what was going on there. And these also included, let's see, other counties like Ventura and Santa Barbara were included in some of these, but these were the 14 check-ins from the local coordinators. One of the interesting things is we had 10 come in from San Diego on 40 meters or on 75 meters. There should have only been one at the start, but we got 10 check-ins. So I don't know what happened there, but I don't know if Rob's on here. I don't know if Rob's here tonight. But that was kind of interesting. I was expecting multiple things coming in from San Diego, but I wasn't expecting that one. And we had one stray check-in who is of an acquaintance of mine, Bob, W6WO, or I screwed that up. It's W7WOW. I'm sorry, Bob, if you're here. He's the EC for the Nevada section, and we talk to him every week on some of our local nets down here on 75 meters. W7WOW. Sorry, Bob, if you're here. I'll fix that. So the second net on 40 meters had 5 check-ins from coordinators, and those are from Ventura, San Joaquin Valley, San Bernardino, and San Luis Obispo counties. And in addition to that, we had another stray come in that was not part of the exercise and not part of MCOM, and just somebody who just happened on the frequency, who we know from other nets on 75 meters, but is not part of this Aries or anything going on here. But that was kind of unusual to see that at the end of the exercise when I was going through the logs. It's like, okay. So WinLink regional coordinator, we ran from 8 a.m. to noon as a regional station, and maybe a little after. We didn't stop running it actually at noon. I kept going for a while after because there was still data coming in. We sent out 97 messages from here. We received 64 messages. Of those 64 messages we received, there was approximately 1.5 megabytes of data, which means if you include the overhead in that, and I'm not sure if anybody's got a good handle on the overhead on WinLink, but I'm guessing it's at least 10%, maybe more. We still 1.5 megabytes of data on HF. That's pretty respectable, and I was pretty pleased with that. But we received, in addition to the CSVs, which I'll talk about, we received 9 WinLink forms directly. So people were sending me, as the regional coordinator, WinLink forms directly, which they weren't supposed to do that, but whatever. But I did receive 48 CSV files. Well, that's a lot of files. And of course, we were receiving ACKs, and there's a comment there is that in an emergency situation using WinLink, you really don't want to be sending ACKs out because it wastes bandwidth. You can filter it at the receiving end, but the sender is putting that stuff out there, and that's using up bandwidth every time he does that. So, or she does that. So we would hope that folks got the message not to do that. We ask people to not do ACKs during an exercise like this. In fact, that was actually the purpose of the HF nets, was to coordinate the WinLink traffic, basically a way to do an acknowledgement that the traffic was received, or for the sending station to let us know that traffic was on the way so that we could recover it. So that was the actual purpose of the HF nets, and that's reflected in the traffic that you look at on the HF logs. Data reduction. So all these 48 CSV files, pardon me for 1 second. So now the job of getting all this data, we got to reduce the data, because what we want to do is we want to be able to look at the data, but we want to be able to map all this data out. So there's a certain amount of data reduction that has to take place. You don't want to ask how long it took. And this is the crux of a problem, and we'll talk about it later on. I'll explain where I'm getting at here, but this can't happen in a real situation. We need to be able to respond with the data right away. We can't wait around for days to get through the data, because the data was just, a lot of it was just a mess to deal with. And so it's important that we be able to get results and give them to our served agencies, our AHJs, in a timely fashion. And in the case of this exercise, at the local area, local region, local, what do I want to call it, the local areas, at the county areas, everything went very well. At the regional area, where we're trying to bring all this data together, it didn't go so well. But more on that, and I'll explain what happened. So statistics on the traffic. Let's see, check-ins. And this was, here's our goals too. I'm going to show you, I was talking about the goals, what their objectives were. So here's an idea. I got 129 check-in records in CSV files. That's records in CSV files. There were 51 unique call signs and tactical check-ins. Okay. Let's talk about did you feel it? There are 85 records in the CSV files, 38 unique call signs. Now, there could be duplicates, but it might be a different data set. In other words, the records aren't duplicate, but it's the same station sending another form that's reporting some new information. And that's okay. But there are 85 records, of which 38 of those, only 38 of those 85 are unique. Okay. You're going to start seeing a pattern evolving here. 154 field situation reports in the CSV files, 154 records. That's how many were sent in. 89 of those were unique call signs. Okay. If you're not seeing the pattern yet, I'll have to explain it in a minute. But 213s, 74 213s in the records, but 37 unique call signs or tactical calls out of that. Checkouts were received 52 checkout records, 31 unique call signs or tactical addresses. So there's a problem here. And it's real simple. Lots of duplicated messages. And on in the time frame we were on and the amount of data we're trying to move, that's a lot of duplication of traffic. And of course, that wastes bandwidth like crazy. So that's an issue. And we'll talk about how to mitigate that. We'll discuss that in my when we get to the issues and result all the lessons learned and what have you. So the things that worked, we got timely responses from all the groups. That worked really well. I mean, everybody got messages to us. For the most part, we were receiving things on schedule. And as part of what I should have mentioned, one of the things about the time frame, the timeline, is we were trying to set a pace. So like on an hourly cycle, you'd be sending in some new traffic to the regional section. That's the idea. You collect up data for an hour and then send it out. So you have a pace to what's going on. All right. So I believe that the responses from the majority, there were a few things that didn't go quite according to time, but all in all, the responses were very timely from all the groups that were involved. I said we moved 1.5 megabytes of traffic in 4 hours on HF. I think that worked really well. One of the things to me that went really well here at yeah, that's right, Dan. I see your comment. We operated three HF nets simultaneously here at this location. It's kind of like running field day, right? But the difference between what you do on field day and what we were doing here is we were running high power stations here. We're running a legal limit on one net and 1.2 kilowatts on the other net. And they're not interfering with each other. So it's a testament to the station here. I was really, really pleased with that there was very little crossband interference here. The one exception to that was operator malfunction on my part. I happened to switch to an antenna I shouldn't have switched to on WinLink, and I was interfering with the 40-meter phone net. And that's because the antenna, the antenna I was using on 20 meters is a 20-meter Yagi, and it's adjacent to that 40-meter dipole. So I was getting some interference there. And of course, our net control operator, she didn't have any idea what was going on. She didn't know to ask. And I didn't realize what I was doing was interfering with her. And I finally caught on to it and said, oh, yeah, I'm using the wrong antenna. I need to switch. So we got that sorted out pretty quick and it wasn't a problem. But I do take responsibility for that. That was my problem. It would not have normally happened, but I was really pleased as to how well that worked here with that many stations on the air. Regional coordination on WinLink, relying on the distant gateways, RMS gateways. Yeah, doing that on 20 meters worked out really well, allowing the local guys to use their local HF gateways on like probably 80 meters or 40 meters or 30 meters. 30 meters works really well for the local gateways around here. Using 20 meters worked out really well for me here. So I was real happy with that. And in the end, we were successfully mapping the majority of the data that we received. So that's a good thing. That's a good outcome. That's what our goal was, to be able to do that. So here's some pictures of what was going on here. These are some pictures of the station here at W60Q. Who have we got here? Cap was one of our VHF net operators. Lisa was running HF number 2. That's my wife, KF6QNG. She's on HF number 2. Myself running WinLink, Francina helping out there, KN6LOA. Steve, KK6JTB, he's our assistant section manager here in San Joaquin Valley and vice president of our radio club here in Indian Wells Valley, the CRM Radio Club. He ran HF number 1. And Dave, another one of our members here of Aries in Eastern Kern County, W6TLA, he ran the VHF number 1, where we conducted the local nets here in the Valley. So we all had a lot of fun with that. It was a busy place for about 4.5 hours. And it worked out really well. I was really pleased with our team. And everybody, when we were done, everybody says, we want to do it again. So they were really, really happy about doing this. Everything went extremely well. So some of the photos from other areas, and these are some photos from from Oscar's group in the Northeast District of LA section. They're the only pictures that I've been able to find. But I see one thing real common in those pictures. There's a lot of smiling people. So Oliver, your people had fun, that's for sure. And you had as you noticed, they actually deployed. They weren't operating from home or anything like that. They were actually deployed on the field as portable stations. And kudos to them for doing that. And Steve, I will say, your comment there, Steve, that you just put up there, yes, it was an incredible learning experience for everyone. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward, because there were some issues that we ran into, and we'll talk about that and how we're going to deal with those. So the issues in general. One of the first things that I ran into was Oliver was sending me what you would call flash or priority traffic. And these were bulletins that were meant to be forwarded out to the whole group. So this stuff comes in, and he had read now, or the equivalent thereof, at the end of the line. And on a small screen that I was using, I didn't see it right away. And after I saw a few more of these pop in, I think it was like the third one came in, I sent him a note. I said, I read a little bit more of it, and I'm going, oh, you want me to forward these out to everybody? And it's because I missed it. I completely missed it. So we have made a recommendation that in the future, we put that precedence at the beginning of the subject line if it's not there already, because some of the forms do create a precedence if there's one available. And I think the example of that is the FSR will do that. You'll see a precedence. So emergency priority flash traffic, put that at the front of the subject line. And of course, this goes contrary to something that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but you'll have to understand the difference. Another problem in general, naming conventions, file naming conventions, among other things, organization names. So folks from one organization might use 4 different names or no name at all, but they're part of the same organization. That's problematic. Subject lines varied all over the place. And this is the stuff that's showing up in the CSV files as they get here to the regional station. Those are important to pay attention to those. Things like your organization name. You know what your organization is, whether it's abbreviated or written out, it needs to be consistent. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Let's see. I suspect that some of the auto-filled lines may have been changed manually by the person sending the data. And in a lot of cases, there's no need to do that. Like the check-in, it fills in the subject line automatically, and you don't need to do anything. You just leave it the way it is. And we got some that had some other things in there that just didn't make sense a lot of times. So it creates a little confusion at this end. The CSV files. This is where things get interesting. The biggest problem that I ran into was inconsistent naming conventions. Now, Oliver and the planning team had created an IEP that explicitly talked about this and gave explicit instructions on how to name the files. I'll give you an example of that a little later. Files were to be named in this manner. And so they have the date and the time. They have the organization name and then the type of file it is. Like this is a CSV of check-ins. So it would say 2023 0930 underscore, it could be San Diego County SDG as San Diego Aries SDG, and then underscore check-ins. Well, got all kinds of things. It was difficult to determine not only where they were coming from, but what the files actually were. And I'll give you some other examples of that in a few minutes, and you'll see where the problem is. So here's the idea of kind of a standard file naming convention where you've got the year, month, day formatted, hours and minutes, the organization name, and the form name. Yeah, exactly. I'll take a look in chat and see what Oliver just put there. And it would be a .csv. Make sure that .csv doesn't get changed, because that'll lead to more problems. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. When they're done in this fashion, they're a lot easier to sort out, merge, and map. But if I got 5 files coming in with exactly the same name that might be coming from 5 different places, what do I do with them? You know, I don't know what they are. I don't know what the files are. I don't know where they go. I have to take the time to open the file and look at the data and try and figure out what it is. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that. But I just realized I didn't include that in the recommendations part. But getting multiple CSV files of the same type from the same source. Yeah, using blanks or underlines. Underlines is probably the smart thing to do, Dave. Yeah, the same name looks like WinLink messages. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. That was a problem. Multiple CSV files being received from one source with the same name. Some of them I received 4 times. And there you go. Oliver, you just posted that. If you take a look at that attachments pop up there and it shows winlink messages.csv, that's the default name. So you really want to make sure that that's not the default, that you don't use the default name. And some of the forms, when you do when you export the data as CSV, it'll pop up with this winlink underscore messages.csv. Not very friendly. So I got multiple winlink messages.csv that had different data. That's like, okay. Hey, Steve, thanks for being here. I appreciate you being here. It's good to have you aboard, and I'll be talking to you in the future. Thanks for letting us know. Have a good directors meeting. And of course, the duplicate file names with different contents or duplicate file names with duplicate entries is a total waste of bandwidth. And on HF, our bandwidth is limited. So wasting that bandwidth, it's kind of a precious commodity to just to be able to do that. And one of the suggestions I made is we only send changes, the deltas. And there's an easy way to do that. And I'll talk about that in a minute. More issues, tactical call signs. This was a lot of fun. We use tactical call signs all the time. Everybody should be familiar with them, know them well. There's a perfect example of how to use a tactical call sign right there on that message. It happens to be from Oliver K6OLI representing LA County. And that's exactly what I'd see. Look at the recipient is Red Skies. That was our tactical address for the regional central collecting point here. If you notice some of the other ones, not so nice. A lot of ops use their own call signs or send them directly to me. At least they showed up, thankfully, but I have no idea who they're from. I don't know who these people are. I don't know where they're located. Trying to figure out, which means more time to go and figure out what it is they're sending and where it's coming from, because it might not be in the subject line. So generally it wasn't. So and I've redacted the call signs to protect the innocent, if you notice. It does make it difficult to determine who the sender was or what agency they're representative. And so you see some of the guys there. We see NS7C did it right, SLOECC deck. Oliver with LA County. We've got KJ6ZQ with Ventura. That's the way we had expected it to be done with those tactical call signs. That was what was in the IAP. So that was a problem. Then I had groups with multiple operators sending WinLink traffic. They're using individual call signs, no tactical calls. I don't know where they're from. Now I was expecting this. I'd been warned ahead of time that one of the groups was going to be would have 4 operators sending data, but there were no tactical call signs. Difficult to determine the source. They're just using call signs. And then the other part was non-coordinators. The local coordinators were really the only guys that were supposed to be sending traffic here to the regional location or getting on the nets, the HF nets, the voice nets. So we're getting check-ins from folks who are not the local coordinators. They're just participants. And that creates chaos and confusion and more duplication. So I received all the forms from these other coordinators. Now, there weren't a great deal of them. It was 6 total. So I don't really think that was a big problem, but it does It's a small number, but it does confuse the regional situation. And it points out that it's a need for paying attention to the instructions, training, and paying attention to the IAP and what's required and what's not expected. It's what is expected and what is not expected to be done. So the regional check-ins, et cetera. In the future, what I've asked to do is when we do these nets, we've got the HF nets on WinLink, the regional coordinators should send a check-in to the regional location. We did not do that, and I wish we had. That probably would have made things a little clearer if we'd started out with that. But that's a lesson learned and a point for next time. The check-in forms. Oh, a lot of redundant data again, duplicate records, inconsistent fields between different entries. This stuff was crazy. Blanks in the form and data in the wrong fields. And what we kind of concluded with the data in the incorrect fields was there may have been a version change, and somebody was using an old form and somebody was using a new form, and they didn't map correctly. I should say the fields didn't map correctly to each other. So there were some changes made. Maybe a new field was added in the middle of the form, and that's going to create some problems. The digifeeler files, were received as plain text. It makes it difficult to map out the plain text. That's a problem. It tends to, when it's a plain text file, you can't directly import it into things like Google Maps. So that was a bit of an issue. We got around it eventually, got that all figured out. Again, it was a small percentage, thankfully. It wasn't a lot. FSR files. These were interesting. Many inconsistencies between the entries. And I gave an example here. You can take a look at this. You can actually see the problem. Apparently, there was a field that was inserted, and it shifted everything. Here's the MGRS coordinates, right? Here's your Latin long here. Those all look good. And then here's your your military grid reference system here. And all of a sudden, they're all over one field. And there's this thing here that says form entry. So we don't know where that came from. I'm expecting that it was a new form update that not everybody caught the form. But I had to manually go in and remove that. I think, and what I want to do in the future, if we run into things like that, it should be easy to create a macro within Excel to test that and correct those problems. That should be pretty easy to do. And especially things like the duplicate entries. Duplicate records are easy to remove. But I hadn't set up a macro to do that, and I didn't really want to spend the time doing it. I just removed them manually, which was a lot of effort to do that, but as you saw from the numbers, but it wasn't as hard as it might seem. But getting the field scrambled like that is like, and it wasn't just limited to this. This is just an example. There were other fields that were in different locations, made it very difficult. And the things we were looking for, if you're looking for data like location, latitude, and longitude for mapping, and looking for the name of the organization so that you can use that as part of the mapping. If you don't have that data or it's in the wrong place, you got problems. So this was one of the things that we encountered. So you can see that, again, that problem there that we had. And I'm not sure if we've ever really gotten to the bottom of that, Oliver. I suspect that it was a change in maybe a revision of the form, but I don't know that we ever confirmed that. But let's see. Here's a big one. Don't save CSV files as text files. Save them as CSV files. It does make things difficult if they're not saved as the CSV files. And there's a lot of ways to go wrong on this one. And again, in our instructions, we went over this in our sessions, trying to train people on how to do this and instruct how to do it in WinLink, using the message and that generate maps and CSV files for forms pop-up. You bring that up. I don't have an example of it showing here on the screen, but you basically bring up the pop-up. You use the generate CSV file, very explicit. It's the bottom center of that pop-up. It's the bottom of the page. You create that will create the CSV file. Don't use export form data. That does something entirely different. Don't map the data and expect that to create a CSV file. There's 3 different buttons that you can use. There's a lot of ways to export data out of WinLink. The one you have to use is that one that says generate CSV file. We believe that some folks didn't use that. So the other thing you can do is you can set range limits on the date and time, right? So that way you limit the data that you send. So one of the problems that we had is that, like on the hour, somebody would send the check-ins over and over and over. Well, they got more check-ins, so the file grew, but they're sending all the other data again, so it's redundant data. What you do when you export the file, there's a when you create the output file name and location with that browse button, there's a couple of fields there that allow you to set the date and time for the start and end time of your export. And you can set that at like 1 hour limits, 8 to 10 or 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, etc. That way you limit the amount of traffic that's being exported into the CSV file. So that's a good one to be aware of, rather than just sending the whole batch of data over and over and over again. I want to stress that, well, ISO standards, they really are ISO standards for file naming. It's really where it comes from. And the comment in there is correct about the whether you use spaces or underscores. I think my background goes back to Unix days, and we couldn't use spaces in file names and things. It had to be an underscore. So this is going back quite a few years, but a lot of things will recognize a space, like Windows will recognize a space in a file name, but in most circumstances, but a lot of times it won't. So best to use underscore between the elements of the file name. But again, using a standardized naming convention. Oh yeah, and I talk about the instance. This is something that I added on here. And so if you're sending the same file over and over again with basically updates, rather than just having just the same file name, you can add an instance number. Say, okay, here's instance number 1, here's instance number 2, 3, 4, etc. So it gives you a way to separate the files more than just the time and date. But this stuff should be pretty self-explanatory. That's why I like that instance sequence number, to include that in there. Let's see, what else have I got here? Okay, that's the next page. That's it for that one. More recommendation. Oh, that's interesting. No animation. Whoops. Redundant data. This is just reiterating that same thing, and I want to stress that. Send changes when updating CSV files. Don't send the whole file every time. We reduce the message bandwidth by doing that, and using the time limits when generating the CSV. With regards to modifying pre-filled fields, a lot of the forms automatically fill in the subject line, and you don't really want to be changing that. Like for instance, I got the check-in form here. This is what it fills in automatically whenever I do a check-in. That's what it says. Or it'll do coordinates or whatever, but there's street address, whatever you happen to be putting in the field there for your location. And this is when I'm at home, this is it. So I don't touch that, I don't change it, I don't modify it. Oh boy, more animation missing. That's interesting. I must have picked the wrong file, wrong sheet. I mentioned this before about flash emergency priority traffic. Some things like the FSR do fill in the precedence, but putting at the beginning of the subject line. So this is the exception. If you're sending something out that's urgent, it's emergency traffic, it's priority traffic, and you have to change the subject line, put it at the beginning of the subject line. Don't add it at the end, because it might get missed, like it was in my case, because of the size of the window that it was being displayed in. It was truncated. The other thing I can't stress enough is to be consistent. The field contents, the organization name, for instance, should be agreed ahead of time and filled out consistently. Like I said, I had getting responses from one particular group that they're all different. Well, what organization do you belong to? Well, maybe they're unsure. That needs to be part of an IEP that says, this is the organization name. And guess what? You can put it right on the form. There's a setup button on the form when you bring it up that allows you to put your organization name right up at the top of the page, and it's there to be used. You don't have to fill it out again. It just always uses that. That sort of thing should be agreed upon and done ahead of time. Basically have that. This does make it difficult for sorting and mapping the data. Because if I want to map the data from one particular organization, but I've got 4 or 5 different organizations named with that group, it's like, well, how do I collect all that data up, and how do I select that data field consistently? It does make it difficult to map. And it holds true at all levels, not just down at the local level, but here at the regional level. It's the same problem, keeping things consistent. So let's see, what else? Yeah, this is a biggie. And I think this is what led to some of the problems with the fields being different, is always use the latest version of WinLink Express in forms. We think that caused some of our problems. Use the latest versions of both. Use the latest versions. And one of the things that we talked about during the debrief, our planning group debrief, was, not making changes to the forms prior to an event. But a lot of times that may be a necessity. So if a form gets changed right before an exercise, we have to do something to make sure everybody's got the copy. And one of the recommendations that I made to Steve, and I'm sorry he left because I wanted to thank him for that. If you'll notice, I spoke with Steve after we did this exercise, and one of the things I mentioned to him was, when you first launch WinLink Express, it will have a couple of pop-ups that can come up. One pop-up says new forms are available, and the other pop-up says a new version of the program is available. Well, the default has been do it later. And, force of habit, some pop-up comes up, I want to hit return and enter, right? And of course, that's the default. So it says it defers it till later. So I don't get the latest forms. I made a recommendation that be changed such that the default does the update. And I noticed that recently when I brought up the application, and you brought up a new version of the application and the forms, it's doing that now. So kudos. I think that's the right. It's W6DQ Dennis's opinion, but I think that's the way that it should be. The update should be the default, because you really want to force users to be able to have the latest versions. And that makes a difference, as we saw in this exercise. Lastly, here, the use of technical call signs. It's essential, and we all are familiar with doing that. Use the technical call signs. Now, on the phone net, we use technical call signs, and you use your own personal call sign either at the end of the transmission or every 10 minutes. That's the rules. That's the law that we have to do that. But at least in WinLink, we don't have to do that. But it is part of the WinLink. If you look at the window, you saw it earlier. I see that the messages are sent by, like the one I showed you is from Oliver K6OLI, representing the agency LA County. So tactical call signs are important, and they should all be agreed to ahead of time in an IAP, and especially at a regional exercise like we had here, a large exercise like this. It needs to be in the IAP, and people need to pay attention to it and follow that. Important stuff. And of course, on that note, that IAP needs to be concise and needs to be followed. That last part is the important part, following the IAP. Obviously, the local IAPs are going to differ from the regional IAP. What goes on at a local level is going to be different what goes on at the regional level. You have local nets, we have a regional net. So those things are going to be different. But things like defining file names and where things are being sent and how they're being organized, those have to be consistent. Organization names, that's a big one. We trained all the local coordinators at our planning meetings. That was a given. We still had problems with this. As you saw, a lot of the local coordinators weren't using the tactical call signs, even though they were assigned and agreed to at the planning sessions. We need to be able to ensure the flow down. Now, some of that data in the regional IAP is not intended to go down to the local level. Things like the frequencies of the HF nets, the local folks, the local participants are not participating on those nets. They're not sending regional traffic. They're sending local traffic and operating on local nets. So that's the information that needs to be in their local IAP. So it's important to have the correct flow down of data, and stuff that's not needed at the local level should be excluded. For instance, frequencies of the regional nets. And like I say here, even though they were published in the IEP, they weren't always followed, and that was unfortunate. But I do have some really good news out of all this, and I hope I think I noticed that Oliver had to go because he's in net control, but we all agreed on this that despite the errors that were made, overall this exercise was a success. We met our objectives, which was to familiarize the local groups with WinLink and sending forms, dealing with forms, dealing with the message traffic at a local level. So those objectives were met. The regional problems we ran into, that demonstrates a need for additional training and practice. And of course, you have to say, the negative can be a positive. I mean, don't think for a second that the fact that we realize, well, we need to add some additional training to that. That's a positive thing. It's shown something that we can do better. And that's the whole idea of doing an after action report. Learn from your mistakes, figure out where things went wrong, and change it for the future so that it goes right. Especially on a large scale drill like this, it's covering a large extent, multiple counties, 12 counties, that obviously those different groups have different operating procedures and what have you. Important to coordinate that over that large region. And I think all things considered, it went extremely well. And the takeaway from that was that everybody had fun. And that was a key ingredient, was everybody was to have fun. And the team here at our regional coordination station here, everyone here agreed at the end that we want to do it again. They all had fun and they were ready to do it again. But that last statement, and that was the one thing that really got to me personally, was that consistency in the formats and the data leads to timely results. And that's the thing that I was not able to do. I was not able to generate the data and the cumulative data from the entire exercise in a timely fashion because of the issues that were encountered. So we learned from that. And so next time we'll be more careful. We'll do more training and practice. Those two things, training and practice, are so essential to make this work. But overall, I think it went extremely well. And it reflects on how well Shakeout 2023 went. I think that doing these kinds of sessions here on RATPAC and elsewhere, things like Wave Talkers, things like the San Diego County Aries groups and their short video clips for WinLink, those kinds of tools, training tools, are essential for getting everybody on the same page. And the more we do that, the more training we do, the more practice we do, the better we're going to be at it. We here in San Joaquin Valley, in our section, we do WinLink check-ins every week on our section-wide net. Not everybody's on WinLink, so not everybody can participate with the check-in, but those who are on WinLink do check in. And that's a good practice. It's great practice to be able to do that. And our net control asks us to do not just check-ins, but use other forms from time to time. So we get to practice doing all of that stuff. So anyway, that's it for me. The time is nigh. It's almost it's really time to quit. So with that, I'm gonna give it back to Dan, and we can take questions and hopefully answer questions. And
yeah, let's get some hands up and let's get some questions in chat.
yeah, I've been watching the chat. Yeah, I think the comment from it was from Scott Reed up there in Placer County. Thank you for that. And I unfortunately Oliver left, but yeah, I really would encourage more folks to get involved in things like this on a large scale exercise, because first and foremost, we had fun, but it's good practice and good training to be able to do this kind of thing. So there you go.
Okay, we got 3 hands up here. David, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I can't turn on my video camera, but you can. It says it's blocked by you.
No, nobody's blocked. I can't block the camera part.
You cannot start. Anyway, all right. Thank you. I'm really a big fan of after action reports, and particularly the kind of self-examination that you've done on this. The question I have is that if this event was to occur tomorrow morning, how long would it take you to prepare an IAP, and how would you push it out to the stations?
That is an excellent question. So normally, in a real event, we probably wouldn't be running a regional net like this right away, if at all. We have other, this was, how would I put this? More of, like, I would call it for myself, play acting of being a regional coordination in a disaster. But, the IAP exists in a standardized form that we can get access to. Unfortunately, it's online. But the basic template that we use to create these things, Oliver's created over time, and it's basically a cookie cutter approach to doing it. We take that standard IAP, and just, if there's any slight changes that need to be made to it, we'll do that. But things like that's a typical timeline for our exercises. Saturday mornings, 8 to noon is typically what we run. So that's easy to do that. That doesn't require a change. Things like the operating frequencies, those are pretty much standardized, and they're part of your local, at a local level, they're part of the local procedures, should be standard frequencies and net times and all that. So yeah, it's a great question. Typically, you think in terms of a real disaster, what happens in ICS. There may not be an IAP existing ahead of time. It has to be made up by the incident command at the time. They're moving forward, and it gets refined as you move forward. So you'll have some early on objectives and things like that. So yeah, if this was to be thrown at me tomorrow, we could probably do it pretty quickly and be up with it. The things that might affect it are knowing which bands to be on for a regional net. Those might be things that would affect us, but yeah, I think it's something we can do. I think we could do it fairly quickly without too much.
Yeah, but how would you push it out to all of the stations?
Pushing it out is a big problem. One of the things that we would do is, of course, use WinLink to push it out, and that's part of the process, is using WinLink to push out the IAP at the local levels, which is what the local groups were. I know I can speak for Oliver, because I know that's what he does with his local group in the Northeast District of LA section. I can't speak to the other groups for that, but I know that would be the reliable way to do it if your people are on WinLink. Otherwise, yeah, if you don't have any infrastructure, yeah, I don't know if I can answer that one right away.
Just as a comment, maybe a suggestion, everybody can just keep the last copy of the last exercise until incident command has a chance to update it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and that would be a good solution. We have a standard operating procedures here for our Aries group, and they're like activation procedures, things like that essentially would flow into an IAP if we needed to do that. But for something of this scale, for a large exercise like this, the IAP is essential. You need some document that coordinates all of the activities between all the different groups, and IAP is perfect for doing that. So, but yeah, getting it out to everybody in good times, it's easy, but when a substance strikes the fan, it's not so easy to get it out there. But yeah, I like the concept of having whether it's from an exercise or from a real event, you have an IAP on hand that defines all those things. They should all be defined ahead of time anyway, all your frequencies and what have you for your local group. Those should be part of your normal operating procedures. Like ICS 205 should be part of your normal operating procedures, defining all the frequencies that you use. So those kinds of things should be automatic. Anyway.
You want to see if you can turn your monitor on now?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What I did was I made you a co-host.
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have
It's crazy. Never seen that.
Okay, Scott, you got your hand up. Mr. Scott, KM6RFB. Okay, he's unmuted, still don't hear him. Got a monitor. Okay, let's go over and pick up Tim. Tim, KC1WR, go ahead and jump in there.
Okay, and similar to the other fellow there, it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. So
That's weird.
very strange. Yeah, my comment deals with the WinLink forums. The fact that you mentioned that one of the problems is people had different versions of the WinLink forums. But you also showed pictures where people were out in the field as part of this exercise. And that's one of the issues that we've come across where, unless you're hooked up to the internet, how are you going to get the newest forms? Yes, before you walk out the door, you should hook it up and do that. Hopefully, if you remember. But that's, it seems like there's flurry after flurry of different versions of the forms that comes out. Be wonderful especially for an exercise, if they said, okay, starting like 3 days before the exercise, we're not going to push out any forms updates.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and that was one of the points that we tried to make at our planning team after action report. Was that it's probably a bad idea to do updates to forms.
I think you muted yourself. Still muted.
That's weird. I didn't touch anything. So that was very strange. I don't know what happened there. But the point was that we believe that there should not be forms updates done before an exercise or before some large scale event like this. Now, it's kind of hard to avoid that. If there's an emergency, that's one thing. If there's some kind of a critical update to a form or to the program that has to be pushed out, that's one thing. But I think it's incumbent upon us to try to maintain the most current version of the software. And I do every time I start my system up. I mean, I get there's a new version available and it gets downloaded. It gets installed and the new forms get installed. And I don't think, frankly, I don't think this has been much of a problem in the past. I think there were some things that took place before this exercise that I think drove some of the changes in the forms that caused some of the problems that we encountered. I don't think the forms would be going through those kinds of changes on a regular basis, thankfully. But I can't swear to that, but it's my own feeling about the way things typically go. I'm an old system engineer, retired, and stuff like this is inevitable. That's why we have document control systems and things like that. I was part of system engineering. The same thing here, version control, very important. Keep the current version on your system and update it every opportunity you have to do so. That's my answer to that.
Yeah, as far as there are certain circumstances, like I was working the Red Cross up in Connecticut, and they had a WinLink computer at their regional office that they would use to contact shelters via WinLink and whatnot if needed. But that computer was not allowed to be on the Red Cross network, which was within the building. So we always had to manually update it, which I had a nice little 128 megabyte drive that I would do that. The other thing that hopefully would happen is that, like right now, after this exercise, forms would be looked at again, updates would be made, and there probably wouldn't be much in the way of updates, closer to the next exercise, because it would be all lessons learned from this exercise.
I'm wondering, I've never tried this before, and somebody here may be able to tell me. So I just brought up WinLink to take a look at something. I think I'm not sure if the forms are available. The forms may be available as a catalog request. Can anybody answer that? Does anybody know? I've never tried that and never really looked at it to see if I could do that. But I would bet that if you were out in the field and you needed to update a form, you probably could do that via however you're linking in, whether it, via HF or a VHF link. You should be able to do that. I need to investigate that. Can anybody answer that on here? Does anybody know?
I believe you're correct. It allows you to download in case you're offline. You still have the forms to work with.
Well, no, but the catalog request, you can do a catalog request for forms. So you can get you can get an update of a specific form if need be.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Like I said, let's see.
If it is possible, then that would be great if at the beginning of the exercise or the event, they published and said, these are the versions of the forms. If you don't have that particular version, go here, do this.
Yeah, I don't really want to spend a lot of time doing this here while we're online here, but
Right.
I'd certainly research offline and figure out.
Oh, yep, I'll be looking
I
as
wish,
well.
yeah, I wish Steve.
Dennis, it's not a catalog request.
It's not a catalog request. Okay,
There's
thank
an
you.
Aries Races category, and in that they don't have forms. I think it's, first of all, no longer current what they do have there.
Yeah.
It's not complete, but it's an idea maybe.
Hey,
Yeah.
real quick, Dan, can you hear me?
I hear you fine.
Okay, I'm back on audio now.
Okay, good. Okay, you want to move along to Scott?
Yeah.
Or-
Thanks, Scott.
Hey, so real quick, so Placer County would be great. I live up here. Number two, I work for the state of California, the Emergency Medical Services Authority. We never heard about it.
Okay.
We didn't even know there was an exercise going on because we have a complete amateur radio room at in our warehouse,
Okay.
and we manage all medical in the state of California.
Fantastic.
And to David's question real quick, typically an operational period on and get an IAP together. It's one op period. And what we do with ours, we push them out with QR codes.
Mm.
We put them in a Dropbox and QR code them out, and that way anybody can get to them.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the guys down in LA do a similar thing with Google. What is it? Google Files.
Google Docs.
Google Docs. Yeah, that's how they distribute their stuff. But of course, that means that you got to have an internet available. But if your internet's not available, that might be a little tougher. But
Run it across Arden.
yeah, you do it across Arden. Absolutely. Of
Yeah.
course, we don't have Arden here where I am, unfortunately.
But no, yeah, we would love to have participated in this set exercise if we had known about it.
We would have loved to have had you guys participate next time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. That's all I had.
All right. Well, appreciate it. Thank you for letting us know about that. I've got you down in my notes here, and we're going to make sure that you're part of it next time. We'll get you included. That's really cool.
Okay, Dan, California Dan, take it away.
Okay. By the way, the new version of Zoom does have the host preventing starting video. When you try, you get the same. You found it and fixed it. Okay. It's got to do with that AI stuff, I'm sure. You now have an AI companion, whether you want one or not.
Oh boy.
So the structure of this exercise as a California or Southern California, Southern and Mid California regional exercise has no relationship to what's going to happen if there is a real emergency.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because every local group is going to need to do what their local authority having jurisdiction wants them to do. So pushing out an IAP for all of the amateur groups is a non-starter, but working with your local authorities and ensuring that, they have a place for you in their IAP, then allows you to refine that further. And to do it smartly, you need to be using the frequencies and talking to the people you do every day or every week, because those are the people you're going to trust in an emergency.
Yep.
So that was just sort of a big overshadowing. And I'll tell you what, you can't make enough mistakes. And I speak from experience to not enjoy a good, brutal after action report. And I don't know that I've ever seen one or learned as much from one as someone as critical as Dennis could be about identifying what the weak points were. Because it has to be brutal, or not everybody who needs to learn is going to learn.
That's right. Yeah.
It's not personal. It's just he didn't miss a beat. And if I'd have done something else wrong, I'd have confessed to him, but I didn't need to because he saw it all.
Oh, you guys did okay.
And then
I'll give you a B.
for WinLink, there's absolutely no excuse not to. And I just checked. They didn't make the default to automatically update, although that should be everyone. And if you're an RMS, it's a requirement.
It is. It is. I just brought it up and it did it. It says for the automatic update, the
Well, that's because in your settings you have that checked in the lower right-hand corner. In the main WinLink Express setup.
I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Look in the lower right corner.
Yes,
that's where you want to check automatically install updates without prompting and automatically install field test versions.
What you want is, so the way I've got mine set up, I don't have automatically installing updates without prompting. I want to be able to have control over what gets installed. Like if this thing puts out an update right before we're doing an exercise, I don't want to install it. But like the day before or the day of an exercise, and I bring this thing up and I get that message, I probably don't want to make any changes at that point. I don't want to break it. But what they were able to do was when you bring up WinLink now, okay, come on. It will prompt.
Yeah, I haven't seen that case.
So I'm going to bring it up and see. It's sitting here. Typically, what it'll do is there'll be a little pop-up that comes up. The first one is for the forms. There's been a forms update. Do you want to install it now? And in the past, I've got it right here. I can actually show it to you.
Okay, they change. Okay, yeah.
It actually is different. Take a look. Oh darn it! I can't get to it. Hang on.
No, I believe you because I
want everybody to see this. This is what changed. Oh, come on, right there. Okay, you should be seeing my WinLink screen there. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Prior to now, you notice that this is the default is update now. So if I hit return, it would update it. Before it was remind me later was the default.
Got it. Okay.
So that did change. And this is a new version of the program. It does the same thing for the forms. So Steve took my comment. He took it to heart. And I'm really grateful for that. I appreciate the fact that they did that. I think it's a much smarter way to do it. But that's just Dennis's opinion.
No, and I'll tell you what though, but if something real is happening and you don't update it, you may find out that you're the problem.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, as a this from personal experience as a system engineer and having worked as a test director and an author of test procedures and things like that, configuration management and keeping this stuff under control is such an important thing that if you're getting ready to do a test, you don't want to be making changes at the last instant. You really have to maintain the baseline. Whether now, if there's like I said, if there's some kind of problem, a critical update that needs to be done, that's entirely different. But if the system's working as is, I'm not going to change it right before an exercise or before an event or during an exercise. I don't want to do that. That's bad. But I want to make sure that when I'm just, on a regular basis, when I use this, I'm using it weekly. I'm gonna if it's got a new version, I'm gonna update it. Now I haven't updated this because I've been sick all week, so I haven't been on the computer in the Radio Shack at all this week. This is the first time I've been in here since I got sick last weekend. And so that's why that came up. I haven't updated WinLink since.
Hopefully that won't bite you. But my past experience in rolling programs out nationwide to 300, 400, 500 offices, that needs to be done on a daily basis if there are, meaningful changes.
I would say if they're critical changes, they need to be done on a more often.
Well, it doesn't become critical until it hasn't been done for 3 days.
Well,
and 2 days ago, they made a change.
We could discuss this on infinitum. I don't.
No, we can't because I totally appreciate where you're coming from, and I don't intend to spend the effort to try to change your mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Okay,
for
fair
this,
enough.
I've made my decision based on observing a couple of hours of stuff between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. every day on a wider view of it, I think. And then I had one more comment for Scott. How do I say? You should get hold of, I suppose, Jim Price and tell him that you want to know about these exercises in the future. And or I could just add you to, my CC mailing list for.
That's the easy way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're part of all of these things that we do. I want to make a comment about something that you said. The idea of a regional coordination like this is totally fictional, like you said. And I've stated that when we started this. It's like we're play acting because we wouldn't really have something like this. On the other hand,
for the exercises, we need to be paying attention.
Showing that we have the interoperability between adjacent counties here and what we've found here in let me give the group a prime example. Dan is my section emergency coordinator. He's located over in the Central Valley of California. I'm the emergency coordinator and assistant section emergency coordinator here in Eastern Kern County. And between us is a 10,000-foot wall of granite. It makes for very difficult interoperability in an emergency. Trying to communicate first off with our county seat. Our county EOC is on the other side of the mountains from where we are. It's easier for us to talk to the guys in LA and work with the guys in LA. Therefore, we've established those connections, that networking, and it's the human networking between our groups. And that's a key takeaway of all of this. Look what we've done in this exercise. We connected 12 counties that only a couple of those may have communicated with before this time. That should have been one of my big.
The reality is, it's easier for you and I to communicate on WinLink than it is for you to talk to the EOC in Bakersfield or me to talk to the EOC in Mariposa 4 miles away.
Oh yeah, well I can't talk to the EOC on VHF from here, and HF is sporadic as to when I can or cannot talk to the EOC. So WinLink has been the win-win, but in terms of building relationships, building your and I'm not talking about a radio network. I'm talking about building your human network, the people that you interact with, the people that are there to help you when you need help. Networking is so important. And I think that's one of the things that we demonstrated in this exercise is how networking works. We brought counties together that have never done this before.
You're how do I say it? Some of the comments that you made about some of the forms and the way they're structured have been taken to heart. And it can't happen overnight, but gradually changes are being made.
Right.
Making sure that if the form has a question of, and the problem is we're working with multiple sets of priorities. But in any case, the forms will now eventually see to it that they're always the first thing on the subject line.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I'm looking at the clock that Dan's.
I'm watching that too, Dan.
Yeah, and the clock behind Dan's shoulder there on his wall says we are at about 8:21 right now. We need to start to think about wrapping this up so people, especially on the East Coast, can go to bed.
Yes, indeed. Well, I really appreciate the fact that everybody has stuck this out. I wanted to go through the comments and see if there were any other comments or questions. Steve, is it KI0KY? I'm assuming, or K10KY. Or you're in Colorado, so it's KIOKY. Yeah, participants demonstrate all these technical steps before the exercise. Yeah, that's a good point. Our planning went on for about 2 months ahead of the exercise. And one of the things that we would hope for is that the local groups, and this of course is a lesson learned, is the local groups would take the time to practice and train and practice and train and practice and train the procedures that we're talking about. And you're right, it could take a year to get everybody to get it right. But that's how you get it right, is you practice. You do exercises. Like I said, we do weekly WinLink exercises of one sort or another where we're um, uh, submitting WinLink traffic for our regional nets here in San Joaquin Valley. Important to do stuff like that. LA does that. LA, I know San Diego does this on a weekly basis. LA Northeast District does this on a weekly basis. That's how you train your people and how you get them practiced in doing these things. And
Lately sending WinLink acknowledgments for the Sunday morning net. I've been sending it to everybody, and so far there's only been one person who didn't have a WinLink account. So it came back.
That's actually good.
Yeah.
It's cool. Let's see. Yeah. And Oliver's comment there, we gave every group 6 weeks lead time. Yeah, I was thinking it was closer to 2 months, but yeah, they had 6 weeks lead time to train their operators. Telling people is one thing, them doing it is entirely a different situation. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So, well, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and I really appreciate the comments and everybody sticking with it. This was a phenomenal exercise for the number of people that we had involved, the number of counties spread across the state of California. And personally, I look forward to the next time we get to do this. And my team here with our from Eastern Kern County, Aries that ran the regional facility here, just really had a blast. And really did learn a lot and know where people need to focus in the future for the next time we do this.